Welcome back. You're listening to the panel discussion, The Future of Identity, Credential, and Access Management in Government, sponsored by Duo Security on Federal News Network. I'm your host, Jason Miller. My guests today are Brian Rosensteel, a cybersecurity architect for public sector at Cisco, Rob Hankinson, the acting director of the Office of Information Technology Infrastructure at the Department of State, Rob Birchmeyer, the Identity, Credential, and Access Management lead at the Marshall Space Flight Center for NASA, Jordan Burris, the Chief of Staff in the Office of the Federal CIO in the Office of Management and Budget, and Sam Youssef, the Deputy Director of the Defense Manpower Data Center in the Defense Department. During the discussion, we've heard several times about zero trust. It's come up a bunch of times. Let me turn to Rob from the State Department. You said you had a couple pilots that are ongoing around zero trust. Where does identity management and access control kind of fit in with that zero trust pilots?
So first, you have to have strong identity to do anything with zero trust, being that it's very centric around the identity of the person and protection of the data. Moving that castle and moat infrastructure back towards those deeper layers is an absolute game changer. It's a huge cost savings as well, especially for the Department of State. We've talked about a couple different policies coming out. One of my favorite ones that we haven't mentioned yet is the TIC 3.0 policy. The Department of State, we spend a ton of money back channeling all of our traffic that needs to go to the internet, to the cloud, back from our 270 embassies to the United States to go through a domestic TIC. Zero Trust is going to help us with that, in that we can, well, today we purchase laptops, we put VPNs on them, we have them collected in a central location. Central people build those, and then we pay for them again to be shipped out. So the cost of the laptop is probably the smallest piece of the whole project. With Zero Trust and TIC 3.0, we're going to be able to deploy a new drop ship method that the user can actually purchase the laptop wherever they want, and using the identity that they already have built, be able to kick off a autopilot sort of feature that then downloads all the security and wraps it around. The two solutions that we're testing is, one is the Cisco solution. The Cisco teams pulled it together and they've done an amazing job. It seems like it's going to work very well for us. There's some upgrades that have got to be done, and they're all over it to get us to that next level. But when that's said and done, we'll be able to use that strong identity to really bring forward our users into the new era and not have to deal with the bandwidth issues of somebody sitting in Caracas and having to try to get to the cloud back through the United States. They can leverage O365 at the directest point possible. They can get to all of their needs, YouTube videos or whatever they need directly without having to come back. A lot of our locations are over satellite. Bandwidth is just an issue. And piping everything, all of our networks over a single pipe is complicated and hard. So moving that, turning our infrastructure into more of a transport is huge. We can leverage all of our different various capabilities of getting people to the destination, satellite links, ISPs, leased lines, even in some case HF. So there's a lot of different paths our users can take and sometimes have to take, looking at the state of the world right now and seeing what's going on specifically today in different parts of the world. Having versatility is huge, and I think Zero Trust is going to get us there.
Brian, Rob from State mentioned kind of the solution that they're testing out. Walk me through a little bit more about what you're seeing more broadly about the agencies who are like, please bring TIC 3.0 more quickly, help us get to Zero Trust through these types of technologies.
Yeah, you know, it's all a part of that transformation that we've been talking about, right? At the core of all of it is kind of understanding Zero Trust seeks to bring in dynamic practices, right? So we've talked a lot about authentication. At the core of authentication, when we look at authenticators, they're inherently static. It's not anything, you know, derogatory or anything against the authenticators. It's just what they are. It's proof of possession of something, right? Whether it be a memorized secret, and that's what a password is, proof of possession that I can remember that password. Or we take a look at a smart card, incredibly strong authenticator, right? It's proof of possession of memorized secret, the PIN, proof of possession of that private key, which resides on that smart card. It doesn't tell us anything else going on during that authentication event. That's what TIC 3.0 seeks to kind of address in some ways when we want to build up a trust for a user as they go into a trust zone. Actually, we see the same thing within CDM, talking about understanding who's on the network. We're seeing this outside the federal government slightly with CMMC and trying to get better data and handle on users and devices authenticating. This is a central theme. All revolves around this idea within Zero Trust of being very dynamic, being very flexible and adaptive. And that's what we've been working with a lot of agencies and departments on. Now, granted, there's multiple facets of Zero Trust, right? Within Cisco, we talk about the 3 Ws, we talk about workplace, we talk about workloads, and we talk about workforce, and workforce being the identity and authentication piece. But it's all about having some type of policy, some type of policy engine, some type of policy enforcement in line within these various pieces that we can change, or that can change automatically in some cases with some type of AI to react to new and emerging threats or different scenarios all of a sudden we need to enact. And I'll pick on Cisco because we try to embrace Zero Trust as much as we can internally and not just advocate it externally. So we look back, last month, Apple releases the announcement of, hey, 14.3, that iOS version and everything older, you need to get off of it because there was a vulnerability allowing for arbitrary code execution. So with Cisco, we've got about 120,000 users, give or take. That extends out to partners and contractors, several thousand applications, about 400,000 endpoints. You can ask yourself how long it would take to ensure that you, one, know every iOS device that's out there, and two, that every iOS device has been updated. And traditionally, you had to say, well, they have to be managed devices. We have to push down the payload to make sure those devices get updated. Zero Trust changes that. It says, no, wait, all of this is going to flow through, in the case of your workforce, through that authentication event. Let's just update that dynamic policy engine to say no version of iOS 14.3 or older can be used to authenticate in. And that's what we were able to enact. And we were able to do that same day during that announcement from Apple. The decision was made, all right, let's update that policy. The things have changed. And from that point, going in, edit that global policy. And at that point, even though those devices hadn't been updated, our authentication had, and we know that we were able to close the door on that. That's the kind of speed of security that we're working with. That's what we're seeing from those Zero Trust initiatives. Key to all this too is it's a mindset. It's not necessarily a product that you're going to go out and install 1,000 units of, and all of a sudden you're Zero Trusted. It's, okay, how do we do this based upon what you have? It's not a rip and replace. It's an enhancement of existing architecture. And how do we do this in the most meaningful way to get you to that speed of security as quickly as possible?
Yeah, and I would just love to touch on a couple of things that we heard from Rob at State and Rob at NASA. I think Brian just touched on it a bit too. One of the pieces to Zero Trust that's probably less popular to talk about is the IT modernization piece on the back end and making sure we can make our legacy systems be as agile to getting to the Zero Trust framework is needed, right? And at the Department of Defense, much as Rob described at NASA, we have a challenge with getting real-time information at the speed of relevance that we require to really enable that Zero Trust framework. And I say that to say that we're still really, really good at it, but to get to that kind of 100% level of agility that we're looking for, it requires us to focus on the front end of the identity management, from that initial establishment of the identity and how we can get those attributes downstream as quickly as possible. And really, I think what we're seeing is, there's not a one size fits all type of answer here, and especially in the department where we operate a lot of classified programs, we have a lot of foreign partners. that are attempting to access that data, and some of them which should be accessing that data, ensuring we have the identity correctly established and distributed on the front end is critical.
Sam, you bring up a really interesting point, that back end, because everyone talks about, oh, we got to move to zero trust. We need to have zero trust. But if you're working on an older system that maybe can't handle the more modernized identity solutions, let's put Brian on the spot there. Brian, what's the answer to that? If Sam has a co-command that's working on client server or mainframe, what do they do? We're going to put Brian on the spot.
Yeah, it's a real challenge. And
all right, we should stop there, right? It's a real challenge.
Right?
No. Walk me through it.
Part of it is understanding, you're only going to be able to go as far as what your limitations provide. Now, we do know that we can bring in multi-factor authentication into mainframes. We've done it. And we know that type of authenticator that we're going to leverage may not be the existing authenticators that we've relied upon just because of dependencies. That's the start, right? When we talk about zero trust, we talk about authentication, we talk about, well, at least get some type of identity assurance, some type of binding to a stronger credential. Some of this we can leverage. Okay, certain types of network devices can be a little bit challenged. That's where we might bring in something like a Cisco ICE to take away the responsibility from that endpoint of doing those various checks that we talk about, and see if we can offload that somewhere else that can then be kind of that gatekeeper of whether or not access is going to be granted, whether or not that particular application or mainframe or something that is going to be able to be reached. But that's also the reason why this isn't just something that everyone can say, okay, I read this, these are the individual elements I need to purchase, and here's where I install them. It really has to come down to an evaluation of what applications and services and what is their capabilities. And from that understanding, then you can go ahead and try to figure out the best ways to bring in what we're talking about. And I think that's what we've been doing collectively, not just industry, but especially within the federal government, to understand that in order to get to even this starting point, we have to centralize our understanding of our environments. We need to not have these silos. We need to understand that we're all working together. And everyone has that central mission, but the IT framework has to get centralized. Maybe not where everything runs under one shop, but at least so that we know what is available in their capabilities, so we know how best to address that moving forward. Yeah, not easy, but something that is doable.
Let me bring Jordan here, because we're pushing up against the end of the show today. But Jordan, walk me through some of the thought process that you're hearing from the CIO Council's perspective, because there's a lot to address here. We hear about IT modernization, we hear about the need for better cybersecurity, and then zero trust that kind of rides on top of it.
So I would say that largely I agree with everything that's been stated here today. I think, from the council's standpoint, we recognize there is a recognition of the challenge that remains, right, for trying to move agencies in that direction. So Sylvia Burns is part of the council. She's actually spearheading an effort where we're looking at how do we make it easier or help lay down kind of the ground rules for how you would go towards a zero trust like adoption, or like the council is partnering with NIST and in order to stand up a test environment and basically test bed set of types of capabilities, much aligned to NIST 800-207, which is a publication that was worked. And in particular for that one, that was around zero trust and how we could potentially adopt it and augment the capabilities that we have today, TIC, identity, and ICAM, how we could use CDM as part of, getting all agencies towards it, recognizing everyone's going to have their own different path of maturity. And I think for us, and one thing we recognize out of OMB is that, coupling not just with the policy, we also have to have, these things put in place to help accelerate implementation. And then, of course, finer point, I would be remiss if I didn't say it, is that, investment in technology is very much critical. And so, one thing we're constantly doing is working with agencies to make sure that they're prioritizing their investments for the key capability areas that are going to be needed to help drive it forward.
All right, I'm looking forward to that work from the CIO Council and NIST, but that's something we will have to talk about another time because unfortunately we are out of time for today. This has been a fascinating conversation, so let me thank my guests. Brian Rosensteel, a cybersecurity architect for public sector at Cisco. Rob Hankinson, the acting director of the Office of Information Technology Infrastructure at the Department of State. Rob Birchmeyer, the Identity, Credential, and Access Management Lead at the Marshall Space Flight Center for NASA. Jordan Burris, the Chief of Staff in the Office of the Federal CIO in the Office of Management and Budget. And Sam Youssef, the Deputy Director of the Defense Manpower Data Center in the Defense Department. You've been listening to the panel discussion, The Future of Identity, Credential, and Access Management in Government, sponsored by Duo Security on Federal News Network. I've been your host, Jason Miller. For more on this discussion, visit federalnewsnetwork.com and search Duo Security.